Okay, let's just dive right in. Picture this. It's the spring of 1944. Britain has been at war for almost 5 years, and the entire country it's just running on fumes.
Exactly. And that's the core of what we're getting into today, this incredible culture shock. The moment this exhausted, rationing Britain meets the absolute overwhelming industrial might of America.
You really have to start there with what life was like in Britain, right? It wasn't just about the military. The whole country was stretched to its breaking point.
It was a worldview built on scarcity. Every single thing was rationed, counted, reused. The national motto was literally make do and mend.
I mean, can you imagine housewives queuing for hours with ration books, hoping for, a scrap of meat? The taste of powdered eggs or ersatz coffee made from acorns, that was just normal life.
And into that world comes Operation Bolero, the American buildup. And it's not just an army, it is an industrial miracle showing up on their doorstep.
We talk about the 1.5 million soldiers, which is a staggering number on its own. But the amount of stuff they brought with them is what's truly, it's almost impossible to grasp.
It really is. We're talking somewhere between 16 and 17 million tons of cargo. I mean, try to even visualize what 17 million tons looks like. It was abundance on a scale the British just couldn't comprehend.
So let's talk about that physical shock.
Yeah.
The moment it all starts arriving. You're living in a port town like Southampton or Liverpool. What do you see?
You see your entire world change. These ports, they just start groaning under the weight. I was looking at the figures in Southampton just in 1 month in early 44. Something like 38,000 vehicles came ashore.
38,000. Not tanks or trucks, just vehicles.
Just vehicles. The whole infrastructure was just buckling.
And what always gets me is the stories from the locals, the fishermen in Plymouth, people who knew those harbors like the back of their hand.
Right. And they said the ships were packed in so tight you could literally walk from one side of the harbor to the other without ever touching the water.
The sea just disappeared. It became this forest of steel masts and gray hulls.
It did. The sea just disappeared beneath hulls. That was the phrase they used. And pretty soon, the established ports they ran out of room completely.
So what do they do?
The British port commanders were sending these frantic reports back saying, we have nowhere to put any of this. So they had to start anchoring ships in long lines miles out into the ocean, creating these huge floating piers just to manage the overflow.
So the density is one thing, but then there's the speed.
Yeah.
This idea that it wasn't just a lot of stuff. It was being replaced at a rate that was, revolutionary.
That's the real industrial shock. It's not how much they brought, it's how fast they could make more. British shipbuilding was this careful, traditional craft. The American approach was something else entirely. They weren't building ships, they were manufacturing them.
The Liberty ship.
The Liberty ships. The numbers are they're insane. Across all the U.S. shipyards, they were completing, on average, 3 of these massive cargo ships a day.
A day.
3 a day. A new 10,000-ton ocean-going vessel rolled off the line every 8 hours. It was an industrial tsunami.
Can you just imagine being a British staff officer?
Yeah.
Someone who has spent years counting every bolt, every shell, every gallon of fuel, and then you see this.
They were just bewildered. There's that great story about the British general who's touring a supply depot, and he's just looking at these mountains of crates stretching to the horizon, and he just shakes his head and mutters, God, they've brought everything but the Statue of Liberty.
Which is such a perfect line, because that's what it was, right? The promise of this endless American capacity, all sitting there in warehouses in the English countryside.
And the speed applied to the most critical stuff, too. The specialized landing craft for D-Day. The British just couldn't build them fast enough.
We're talking about the LSTs, the landing ship, tank.
Exactly. These giant floating ramps that could carry 20 Sherman tanks straight onto a beach. In 1943 alone, American yards launched over 2,000 of them. They just printed them until the problem of a craft shortage, which had plagued earlier invasions, simply ceased to exist.
They just overwhelmed the problem with logistics.
Precisely. They delivered victory through sheer tonnage before a shot was even fired.
Okay, so let's bring it down to the ground level, to the thing that every British person saw and immediately started joking about. The Jeep.
Ah, the Jeep. It seemed like they were multiplying like rabbits, didn't it? For the British military, where a staff car was a shared precious resource, this was just bizarre.
Right, and that story that captures it perfectly. The British liaison officer who gets assigned his own Jeep, which is already a shock, and then the American motor pool sergeant asks him completely seriously if he wants a second one as a spare.
And he wasn't joking. That was the mindset. The joke that went around the British troops was, The Americans have 3 jeeps for every man, 1 to drive, 1 for his gear, and a third in case the first 2 break down.
It's funny, but it points to this whole philosophy of war, this baked-in redundancy.
It absolutely does. And you see that philosophy turn into real martial power when you look at ammunition. This is where British scarcity met American brute force head-on.
British artillery units were trained to be so careful. Every shell was precious. You made every shot count.
And then they'd stand there and watch an American battery use more ammo in a single afternoon of practice firing than they might see in a month of actual combat. The stockpiles just grew into these literal hills of ordnance.
The sight of it must have been. You'd feel a mix of awe and probably some professional jealousy.
Totally. And when the Brits would gently suggest, maybe a bit of conservation was in order, what was the standard American reply?
We brought plenty.
We brought plenty. It was a declaration of industrial supremacy. It was a whole different way of thinking about how to win a war.
Which brings us to maybe the most profound culture shock of all. Not the hardware, but the food, the comforts.
Oh, the ice cream moment. This is it. This is where the two worlds collide in the most human way. British soldiers are eating bully beef and hard biscuits. Civilians are eating something called a Woolton pie.
And then you walk into an American mess hall. It's a fantasy land. There's fresh meat, real coffee, white bread, desserts. That story of the British sergeant who saw them serving 3 different hot meals for lunch, including steak, he almost started crying.
It's the luxury of it. And that leads to the ultimate symbol of American excess, the thing that is just legendary. The ice cream barges.
The very idea to dedicate shipping space, industrial capacity, refrigeration, all to make sure you can have fresh ice cream in a combat zone.
It's the ultimate logistical flex. To the British, who are rationing sugar by the teaspoon, it was from another planet.
And that's where you get that famous quote from the Royal Navy officer, right?
Yes. He hears about this and says, "We're still rationing sugar by the teaspoon, and the Yanks are building floating ice cream parlors. We're not fighting in the same century."
It just captures it all. This incredible gratitude that this power is on your side, but also this humiliation by comparison.
Absolutely. And that's where that famous phrase comes from, isn't it? Overpaid, oversexed, and over here. It's gratitude mixed with a heavy dose of envy.
Okay, so all this buildup, all this stuff, it all leads to one moment. Early June 1944. The final assembly of the fleet.
The great reveal. And the sight was, well, it was biblical. The final count was just under 7,000 vessels. 6,939 ships stretched from horizon to horizon.
You couldn't see the water. People said it looked like a bridge of steel that went all the way to France.
And the symbolic power of some of those ships. You take the USS Nevada, a battleship that was sunk at Pearl Harbor. They raised it from the mud, repaired it, sent it halfway around the world, and there it sits in the English Channel, firing 1,400-pound shells into Normandy.
That's not just a ship. That's a statement.
It's bringing your entire national will to bear. For the British who saw that fleet, the war suddenly felt inevitable. General Montgomery looked out at it and just said, "This is what victory looks like." For them, victory was no longer just necessary, it was now a mathematical certainty.
And that philosophy of abundance held right up to the very last second, when Eisenhower had to postpone the invasion for 24 hours because of the weather. A logistical nightmare.
For anyone else, yes. For the Americans, their logistics guys just shrugged and pointed at their manifests. They had planned for it. They had brought enough for delays, for disasters, for things that hadn't even happened. The mindset was, you calculate what you need, and then you bring twice that much.
So in the end, this whole deep dive, it's not just about ships and jeeps. It's about this collision of two cultures.
Yeah.
British grit and resourcefulness meeting American overwhelming industrial power.
That's it. D-Day succeeded on that scale because one nation had the ability to produce and deploy material abundance beyond anything the world had ever seen before. That was the weapon that truly won the war.
Which leaves you with a final thought to chew on, doesn't it? D-Day wasn't really won on the beaches of Normandy. It was won months, even years, earlier. In the factories of Detroit, the shipyards of California, the steel mills of Pittsburgh. What does it mean when a country can literally manufacture victory on that kind of scale?